What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, July 24th, 2017, start of a brand new week and start of another week of Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump. And again, there is zero evidence of any wrongdoing by Trump or any of his staff or associates. And, of course, today they were trying to go after Jared Kushner, and he had a closed-door meeting. Senate investigators came on out and said, all of my meetings with people from other countries, and there were some 20 different countries, they were all part of the normal ongoing course of business. There's no collusion. And the Hillaryites are still out there trying to push this thing as hard as they can. Evil, evil, evil Trump, Russia. And basically, at this point, it's becoming obvious that the liberal establishment is continuing to pound the Russia did it narrative because they don't have anything else to work with. They didn't even really have any good ideas or policies going into the election last year. They lost the election, and so they said, we didn't lose because people didn't like Hillary Clinton. It was those evil Russians stole the election away from Hillary Clinton and gave it to that evil Donald Trump. And they're now trapped by their own propaganda. They can't back off and say, well, yeah, we were kidding about that. Even though Chuck Schumer is now out there saying it's time to let this thing go, that Hillary lost the election because people didn't like her. They didn't want to vote for her. They got sick and tired of her playing the feminist card, the women's card, the gay card, the abortion card. It was all smoke and mirrors and no substance. And Trump came on out there saying there are some serious problems with this country, and we have to deal with it. And polls are showing that we have Russia burnout in the American people. Only 6% of Americans still think the Russian narrative is important. And by the way, that 6%, most of those think that it is just a lot of nonsense, that it's just a lot of whining and crying by the liberal Democrats. Now, we've had another strangely convenient dead body show up. Joseph Rago is a Pulitzer Prize-winning editorial writer at the Wall Street Journal, was found dead last Thursday at his home in Manhattan. He was 34 years old. No cause of death yet, pending an autopsy. And, of course, he'd been very critical in his reporting for Obamacare. And he had been currently working on a story about how Hillary Clinton, while Secretary of State, facilitated an American company evading the Russian sanctions to buy a Russian company. And, of course, a large donation was then made to the Clinton Charitable Foundation. And apparently he was on top of this story, and now he is no longer with us. So the wet work is continuing, even though the election is over here. Now, as you know, we have a new communications director at the White House, Scaramucci, and he's already out there threatening to pare down the White House communications staff if these leaks do not stop. And I think he needs to. Simpler is better. Apparently, during one of the press conferences, a CNN reporter asked Scaramucci if Trump will stop calling news stories he doesn't like fake news. And Scaramucci came on back and said, personally, your network wrote untrue stories about me and apologized to me after you had to retract the story. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Bob in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was looking in the Internet, and I can't find my answer. What I'd like to know is, for the state of Indiana, what is the poverty threshold for a family of 2 adults?
I actually would not have that number. I'm very surprised that you could not find that somewhere on the Internet. Maybe one of our readers will send it in, and I'll post it to whatreallyhappened.com. Obviously, it does vary state to state, or maybe it's just one of those numbers that the government no longer wants to put on out because so many people are now living below the threshold of poverty in this country.
Could you give me a round number?
I have no idea. I'm not going to sit here and guess.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And, yeah, it would be an important number, but we know that something like 1/4 of Americans are not even keeping up with their regular monthly bills right now. We are being driven into poverty to feed the war machine, to feed Israel, to feed the medical industrial complex, the security industrial complex. There's no question about it. Every dictatorship in history tries to destroy the middle class and drive them down into poverty, because it's from the middle class that opposition to oligarchy always rises. And we're seeing it happen right here. Now, getting on back to the political scandals here, do you remember Brian Pagliano? And apparently he was at the heart of Clinton's email server. He'd set it up for her. He was summoned before Congress. Supposedly he got an immunity deal and still refused to testify. In fact, even ignored a congressional subpoena. And apparently he's been working over as a contractor at the State Department, so he's still around. He hasn't joined the dead bodies list yet. But here's the interesting part. All of Brian Pagliano's emails from when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State have erased. They have all of his emails up to Hillary Clinton coming into office, then they stop, and then after Hillary leaves the State Department, Brian Pagliano's email records begin again. So somebody on the inside is destroying evidence to protect Hillary Clinton. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Interestingly enough, the FBI has gone to the home of Imran Awan. Now, he was a longtime right-hand IT aide to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. He was also part of that scandal where these IT workers were caught hacking into the computers of members of Congress and stealing information. And apparently the FBI went to his home and they seized these smashed computer hard drives. And apparently the FBI thinks that even though they have been physically destroyed, it's still going to be possible to recover the data from them. And there are some rather interesting technologies out there to do that. Why he didn't simply get rid of the hard drives, I do not know. But apparently Debbie Wasserman Schultz is starting to cut a deal. Her lawyer's negotiating. And she is now cooperating with prosecutors, and she's allowing a scan of the laptop. She stonewalled this for months. She was literally threatening police departments with a cut to their budget if they touched it. Now she's back and saying, okay, yeah, sure, go ahead. So she may be about ready to cut a deal. And all I can say is I hope she stays out of small aircraft or suburban Washington, D.C. parks, because there is a lot of wet work going on right now to protect the Clintons here. And again, the Obama holdovers in the government are a big part of the problem, and they should all be given the heave-ho. Story coming out of Breitbart, where apparently officials from the State and Justice Department, Obama holdovers, are basically making excuses for why they can't process and release the 100,000 Hillary Clinton emails as ordered under a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. Now, there's no privacy exemption. Under the law, they have to turn it over. But apparently the State Department and the Justice Department are saying, oh, we just don't have enough people. There's been a hiring freeze. And let's be honest, the public isn't interested anymore. This can't be made a priority. And they're stalling, is what they're doing. They're stalling. It's time to get those holdovers out because they are a big problem in the State Department, in the Department of Justice, in the White House itself. And finally, we are getting word. Finally, Donald Trump has asked the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, to investigate Hillary's ties with Russia. It's time to put the focus back on Hillary and the Uranium One deal, back on this story that this Jeff Rago was writing over at the Wall Street Journal. Donald Trump is finally starting to fight back with all this Russia nonsense here. David Stockman is out there with an editorial saying, it's time to start locking these people up. Brennan, Rice, Power. They're making a mockery of the American justice system because they keep getting away with what they keep getting away with. And it is angering and it is frustrating. Now, getting on over to the corporate media, apparently over at the New York Slimes, employees are, about 100 of their employees are accepting an offer of a buyout package. Apparently, there are going to be staff cutbacks, and rather than be fired or let go, a lot of the employees who are under contract are going to allow their contracts to be bought out, so that they will leave the New York Times early in exchange for a lump payment that will allow them to move on in life. And it's another indicator. The corporate media is self-destructing. It is self-destructing, and they did it to themselves by standing there shoulder to shoulder with a government that was lying to us about things like Saddam's nuclear weapons. And they stood up there and said, oh, yes, Saddam's got nuclear weapons, just as even today they're still out there pushing this. Trump and Russia are colluding. Trump is a servant of Russia. They're blackmailing him over the things he did in that Moscow motel. They stole the election from Empress Hillary I. They haven't learned from their past mistakes. Or maybe they have, but their corporate masters are not going to let them change. The corporate media is not paid the huge sums of money they are paid to tell you the truth. You can find the truth for yourself for free. The corporate media are paid huge amounts of money to be very convincing liars and salesmen, to sell you the next war, the next tax increase, the next policy, the next candidate. That's their job. Mika Brzezinski said it just last February, live on the air on MSNBC. The job of the corporate media is to control what the American public thinks. That's their job. And the American people are getting fed up with having what they think being told to them every day. And the readership numbers, viewership numbers are reflecting it in the corporate media, to the point where some of these corporate media outlets have now been caught faking the numbers to try and stay in business, to try and look like they're still relevant, using Chinese click bots to generate clicks on their website, all of which, by the way, is defrauding their advertisers. So let's go on over to the war zones. The Syrian army continues to make large gains in Raqqa province, and according to pro-government sources, reached the Euphrates River and cut off the Al-Bakamal-Aleppo highway. That was a major supply route. So that's a major strategic victory here. Meanwhile, fighting back on the other side, Al-Qaeda has taken control of the Syrian city of Idlib from a rival jihadist group. That is probably one of the best developments we are seeing in Syria right now, is these various U.S.-backed terror groups are now starting to fight and kill each other. It's falling apart over there. The U.S. has another major foreign policy disaster on their hands. Now, Syria has gone up to the United Nations and pointed out how the United States, which does not have Syria's government's permission to be there, has destroyed quite a bit of Syria's infrastructure under the excuse that they're fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And Syria is now saying the United States should pay to replace all of that infrastructure, all the pipelines, all the food processing plants, all the water treatment plants, all of it. The United States should be forced to pay for it. And they're requesting this at the United Nations. Good luck. It's never going to happen. But they do have a legitimate point. Meanwhile, video footage has surfaced showing a huge amount of American armored vehicles pouring into Raqqa. But the question is, who are they for? They're not marked with any insignia to indicate who they're for. Are they going to be used by the U.S.-backed Syrian militant groups or U.S. troops themselves? Nobody really knows. There are so many different disparate players on that field right now. Over at 21st Century Wire, they are asking a very cogent question. Has the United States government abandoned the idea of regime change in Syria? Now, remember, earlier this year, it certainly looked like it, where the Trump White House was out there saying we're ready to accept the political reality of Assad continuing in power. Then there was that false flag gas attack at Idlib, followed by that cruise missile attack, and the war was off and raging yet again. So in the last few days, Donald Trump ordered the CIA to end covert support to these various terror groups. And people are asking, are they abandoning regime change in Syria? Probably not. Probably the reason for cutting off the support to those U.S.-backed terrorist groups is the fact that they are killing each other. That's a real waste of money and munitions. So the U.S. is going to try some other strategy. Bigger false flag, direct U.S. military intervention. And again, and as was the case with Iraq, the U.S. is already making noises that they have every intention to stay in Syria even if ISIS and Al-Qaeda are kicked out of the country. Oh, we've got lots more to do in Syria. We have to back the Kurdish forces in taking ISIS territory. In other words, starting to carve out the future Kurdistan. Endless war, endless war. And again, this all goes back to the 1990s and the Project for the New American Century. That was their stated policy, that the U.S. was going to regain global leadership, but it was going to take 100 years of war. Now, over in Lebanon, the Hezbollah command has called on members of the al-Nusra Front to lay down their weapons and surrender, promising that they will be protected. They'll be kept safe. There's an amnesty program going on, and apparently a lot of the al-Nusra Front fighters are going along with it. They're agreeing. They're sick and tired of all this shooting and all this conflict. Probably a lot of them don't even have a clear idea of what they're trying to do anyway, because it keeps changing. Oh, we're here to get Assad. No, we're going to leave Assad. We're going to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, we're not going to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We're going to help the Turks against, or the Kurds against here. And it just keeps swapping. And after a while, the people on the ground can be forgiven for saying, I have no idea what it is I'm trying to do here, except I'm getting shot at a lot. And they're going to be looking for an exit strategy here. Now, things have just gotten very, very, very interesting over in Iraq. Remember, we were starting to hear all these various Iraq government officials talk about it's time for the U.S. to leave. We really would like you to go. You know, so long and thank you for all the bomb craters. But apparently, Iraq just signed a military cooperation agreement with Iran. And that is a major setback for the United States, which worked so hard to turn Iran and Iraq into enemies back during the time of Saddam. And obviously this Iran and Iraq forging close security ties is very worrying to the United States of America, because it means if they go into Iran, they could find Iraq behind them. The Iraqi vice president came on out today and flatly said, no more U.S. bases in my country. Further complicating the issue, Iraq is now making overtures to Russia, seeking military and political alliance. They're pivoting toward Russia. They're distancing themselves from the U.S. government and all of the U.S. military bases dotted across the country. And there is a lesson here, both in the Iran-Iraq deal and the Iraq approach to Russia. Regime change doesn't work in the long run. And in fact, if you look at all the regime changes the United States government has done since the end of World War II, you see that happening all the time. There'll be a short-term gain for corporations, but the long-term problems it creates overshadow them. And that's going to be the case here. That will be the case here as well with Iraq. Everyone's moving away from the U.S. They're sick and tired of what the U.S. has been doing. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, this is an interesting development. Remember, we were talking about how these hard drives were seized and they were smashed. And I said at the time, if he was going to smash them, why didn't he discard them? And it turns out that was a good question, because according to the FBI, When those hard drives were seized, they were in perfect working order. Somebody smashed them up while they were in police custody. This is starting to read like a James Bond movie. Capitol Police officials will not respond to requests for comment. It's amazing here. All right, moving along. And by the way, somebody just sent me federal guidelines for poverty. Apparently, it doesn't change from state to state except for here in Hawaii and up in Alaska. Now, as you know, the corporate media and the government are crowing over the liberation of Mosul. But there's little reason to celebrate when you look at what was left behind, because the place has just been utterly destroyed. There are areas where every single building has been destroyed. And this is supposed to be a victory? Reminds me of something that happened during Vietnam, where U.S. forces went in and obliterated a village. And the excuse was we had to destroy it to save it. That kind of a mindset here. All right, so let's talk about what's going on over at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because that has the potential to flare up into a major, major regional war. And that may be what Netanyahu wants, because he's dealing with his trial for corruption. And apparently his lawyer is now in trouble with the authorities. Got caught doing something they weren't supposed to do. So if you're the leader of a country and you're in serious legal trouble, what do? You drop bombs someplace else. Bill Clinton did it on the day that Monica Lewinsky testified about the stained blue dress. Launched cruise missiles into Sudan and one other country. Blew up an aspirin factory. And you got to pay to rebuild it, by the way. So far, over 900 Palestinians have been wounded at the Al-Aqsa clashes. And these are in confrontations with Israeli forces and with illegal settlers. The settlers are coming in from the illegal settlements to join the fray. And the Israeli forces are shooting at people with rubber bullets. Now, what Israel calls a rubber bullet is not the big inflated kind of bullet-shaped thing that are used as riot control here in the United States. It is a regular bullet with a rubber coating, which Israel arbitrarily says this is a non-lethal weapon, which is certainly not true. And international human rights groups have condemned Israel's use of these rubber-coated bullets, saying the rubber coating does absolutely nothing to minimize the injury and impact. So the settlers have stormed the Al-Aqsa compound, which is just angering everybody in the area. And so the enraged worshipers are confronting police near the Temple Mount. They're not being allowed in. They're praying in the streets around the Temple Mount. Now, the corporate media here in the United States of America is talking about it's all about metal detectors, it's all about metal detectors. No, it is not. Israel has imposed an age restriction. Nobody under the age of 50 is allowed into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the vast majority of the Palestinian worshipers are under the age of 50. They're literally trying to shut them out of the third holiest site in all of Islam. And imagine if you're a Catholic and Israel all of a sudden cordoned off the Vatican and said, we're only going to let people 60 years and older get in. That's what it's like. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Or am I a minute early? I'm sorry, I misread the clock. I misread the clock here. So it's not really about the metal detectors. Israel has arbitrarily simply declared people under 50 cannot go in. Now, this situation is fanning up all over. There's been an ugly incident over in Jordan where an Israeli soldier has shot some Jordanians. Israel's trying to claim this guy has diplomatic immunity. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this very tense situation around the Temple Mount in Israel, where Netanyahu appears to be trying to cause a ruckus. They're taking control of the Temple Mount, which, by the way, is not supposed to be under their control. when the United Nations created the state of Israel, Jerusalem and the Temple Mount were in Muslim hands, and they divided Jerusalem up into 4 sections. And the Temple Mount wound up in the Palestinian section. And Israel does not like that. So Israel does not technically, under international law, have the authority to go in to the Temple Mount and arbitrarily start putting up fences and barricades and saying you have to be over 50 years old to get in and worship. And like I said, this would be like Israel concocting some excuse to put a barricade around Vatican City and say that only people above the age of 60 are allowed to go in. And if you look at it in that context, you understand why the Palestinians and why Muslims all over the Middle East are very, very angry with this. And at this point, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has halted all security cooperation with Israel over this issue. And Netanyahu wants a new intifada to distract from his own personal legal problems, political problems. Let's see, story out of Al Jazeera. Israeli measures at Al-Aqsa will increase resistance. Yeah, that's what Netanyahu wants. He wants an excuse to escalate his war against Gaza, against the remaining Palestinian outposts in the West Bank. He's making his move here. And the confirmation of that is in the Times of India, where they have an article that Israel continues to advance plans for more illegal settlements in the West Bank, defying Donald Trump. So now you have Israel is out there whining and crying that all these other countries are uniting together against Israel. Because, why? Well, they're anti-Semites. Israel has made a national policy of just angering everybody around it. And then when these other nations express their anger, what does Israel do? Same thing it always does. Oh, you're anti-Semites. You hate Jews. That's it. We're not doing anything wrong. This land is all supposed to be ours anyway. God gave it to us. Now, up in Afghanistan, things are not going well for the United States there. Remember, Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires, and there's a reason. The Taliban has taken control of 2 more districts. And they seized the Taiwara district in the Gore province and the Kohistan district in the far northern Faryab province, forcing security forces in both districts to retreat and wait for reinforcements. Afghanistan is just going to grind the U.S. down. Another story about this out of Global Research. When will America's crime spree in Afghanistan end? Because what we're seeing are punitive raids under the cloak of humanitarian warfare. And by the way, that phrase, humanitarian warfare, it's nonsense. There's no such thing. It makes about as much sense as that other phrase, holy war. There's nothing holy about war. War is all of the possible sins you can commit wrapped up in one little bundle and tied up in a pretty little flag. There's nothing holy about it at all. And there's nothing humanitarian about war. Take a look at what happened to Mosul and tell me how those people have a better life now than they did before. The U.S. government has left this horrific trail of death and destruction and misery behind its foreign policy for the last going on 14 years. Now, Sweden is getting ready to hold the biggest military exercise in decades with NATO over fears of Russian aggression. Russia is not the aggressor. Look at who is doing all the invading and the drone striking and the regime change. It's not Russia. It's not Iran. Was not Iraq. It's not even North Korea. It's the United States government. And they're out there screaming about the threat of Iran's possible nuclear weapons and North Korea's nuclear weapons and Iraq's nuclear weapons, which turned out not to exist. And that's pretty hypocritical talk, given that the United States is the only country to actually use a nuclear weapon against the civilians of another country. By the way, I was noticing over the weekend on the Smithsonian Channel, it was all documentaries about war, this victory in World War II, the day they dropped the bomb. It was a documentary about, what a great thing it was to drop the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. Turning on down to Yemen, the Yemen crisis is being described as an absolute shame on humanity. But then all wars are. And this one is particularly cruel because it involves a starvation blockade on non-combatants. Now, Yemen has finally struck back because in retaliation for Saudi Arabia's ongoing aggression, Yemeni forces launched a long-range ballistic missile at an Aramco Saudi oil refinery in Yanbu province. We don't actually have a bomb damage assessment on it, but apparently Saudi Arabia is not picking its targets very carefully. They're shooting up Yemen's fishing boats, trying to maintain the starvation blockade. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Rodney in Illinois, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'm sitting here avoiding the heat indoors doing some paperwork, listening to yourself. And on an FM radio, by the way.
Oh, cool.
Because I rebroadcast at RBN 24/7.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's 87.9, if you're anywhere, 3 miles or depending on the reception. Anyhow, your conversation reminded me of something I picked up on.
Before you go, what was that frequency again?
87.9. It's actually below any other commercial. Most commercial, I think the commercial station started 81.1, or 87, or 88.1. I'm sorry.
Okay, I have family who live near you. I'm going to write them and ask them if they can pick your station up.
Well, it's very unlikely. I'm only pushing 3 watts.
Okay. Well then,
I'm not. I'm a small time guy.
Aren't we all?
Basically for my own convenience.
Okay.
But anyhow, I've got a set of headphones I wear when I mow grass, so I can, when an RBN commercials, I can bump over to a classic rock station, which I do quite often. But anyhow, listening to the local classic rock stations, they've become rather bold. They've been actually slipping in political commentary, and they, as they quite often do, and they have to play Pink Floyd songs.
Yes.
And this DJ made a really vague comment about Roger Waters, about why he was in trouble, I've since learned that Roger Waters is quite a defender of the Palestinians.
Yes.
Were you aware of that?
Yes, I was. And Israel is trying to organize a global smear campaign against him, which your DJ at that classic rock station may be part of. They're going after Gilad Atzmon as well. And that's basically it. Israel does not want anybody talking about the actions of Israel's government, especially right now when it looks like they're ramping up a new escalation in their war against the Palestinians.
Yeah, actually, Roger Waters is on tour. I'm too old to enjoy a concert like I used to, but he was in the St. Louis, Missouri area recently, and I'd be curious, in the coming months or after his tour's over, how it went, because popular opinion is likewise on Trump's side, and I can't imagine Roger Waters being damaged by a smear campaign. But of course, they're going to have some derogatory effect upon his name and career. But I don't think it's going to stick any more than this Trump-Russia thing is sticking.
Yeah, I think people understand that the Trump-Russia thing is a smear job, and that's going to sensitize them to similar situations against other individuals like Roger Waters and Gilad Atzmon and yours truly as being obvious smear jobs.
Well, I certainly hope that the public they pick up on it and they become a little more blank wise in recent years. And again, I hope they're shooting themselves in the foot with this. But anyhow, I just took a break. My wife handed me a nice plate of fresh tomatoes and a pickle, and I came out on the back porch. Thought I'd give you a call.
Well, thank you very much.
All I had, Mike.
Well, thank you very much. All right. I'll let you get back to your tomatoes and pickle. Thank you for the phone call. Okay, now then, General Joe Dunford, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is complaining that people are rejecting the idea of the United States attacking North Korea, saying that we shouldn't take that off the table. It's not unimaginable. Problem with military officers is they love war because it's a chance for more rapid promotion. If you remember the original motion picture of MASH, the character Colonel Potter would begin every one of his speeches the dark days before Pearl Harbor. And at the time, I didn't understand what it was. And then I got to work with that actor on a project, and I said, I'm not sure where that's coming from. And he says, well, it's because before Pearl Harbor, nobody was getting promoted. Nobody had budgets to do anything with. You know, Pearl Harbor lit up the military-industrial complex, and we were all getting promotions and funding. And I said, okay, yeah, that makes absolute sense. People in the military-industrial complex do not like times of peace. They can't make any money off of it. So apparently this General Joe Dunford is out there saying it's not unimaginable. Now, you need to go back and look at how well the United States did in that first original Korean War, which, by the way, is also the setting for MASH. And we didn't do all that well. We didn't win there. The war never officially ended. It's been a ceasefire for decades. That's basically it. And we're getting warnings from a lot of military strategists saying that a new Korean War is going to cost a lot of lives on both sides. And that, of course, is a big problem for America's military planners because the American people are sick and tired of war. They're sick and tired of seeing their young people come home in cheap metal boxes draped with U.S. flags made in China or in wheelchairs. They're fed up with it. They don't want any more. So we're hearing all this talk about a surgical strike to take out North Korea's nuclear weapons. That is a very risky gamble, because I'm sure by now Kim Jong-un has dispersed whatever deployable warheads he has all over his country. Anybody going on in and bombing North Korea is unable to guarantee they will get them all. And there will be a retaliation following that attack. In fact, again, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs has come on out and admitted North Korea is able to launch a limited missile attack, but don't worry, our systems can defeat those. We can protect you. They're selling this thing. They're selling this war with North Korea as hard as they can. Another article in the same line, shtfplan.com. Military just warned Americans to expect a war with North Korea. And to sort of hammer that point home, they're going to conduct another test of the THAAD missile defense. They're going to launch an airdropped ICBM from here in Hawaii, flying up toward Kodiak Island, Alaska. And they're going to shoot it down with the THAAD, just to prove that it really does work. Of course, I'm certain that ICBM probably has a homing beacon in it, which is a courtesy a real enemy will not afford us, should it come to actual conflict. But the U.S. likes to prove how butch they are against a clearly inferior military. That's why they're picking on countries like Iraq and Iran and Syria and Sudan and all these other countries. The U.S. knows they can whip them. Going up against a Russia, China, Iran, Iraq alliance? Maybe not. Maybe not. But that's going to happen this weekend. And I'm pretty sure I heard that C-5 take off the last time they did the test. Now, over in the South China Sea, yet another provocation. The Chinese discovered a U.S. spy plane flying along the edge of the Chinese territory. And so they sent up 2 Chinese jets to intercept it. The jets were carrying air-to-air missiles. And the U.S. government is taking the position, how dare you come on up and interfere with our legitimate right to spy on you? Talk about arrogance here. All right, let's talk about what's going on over in India and China. Now, right now, the shooting has stopped. And apparently, one of India's top officials and one of China's top officials are planning to get together at a side meeting at the upcoming BRICS get-together to try and calm this situation down. The easiest way to calm it down is to remember 2 things. One, there's not a lot of anything there worth fighting over. 2, technically, the ground they're fighting over is part of Bhutan, not India and not China. And I think somehow India got suckered into going across that border. Maybe somebody hacked their GPS units. Try and create a provocation. But it looks like India and China want to back off on this because, after all, they're both nuclear-armed states. Okay, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And down in Venezuela, it looks like the regime change is well and truly underway. Venezuela's opposition is calling for a new general strike. And apparently the clashes over the weekend were very violent. Apparently a world-famous violinist got injured. And apparently this Willy Arteaga, 23 years old, was famous for playing the national anthem on his violin in front of security lines. And apparently he got caught up in the violence this time. Now, you're going to love this story. This is your government being your government. And if you're not U.S. military or police buff, you probably have never heard of the 1033 program. This is a U.S. government program that transfers excess military-grade weapons to local law enforcement agencies. For those of you who are very concerned about your local civil police having things like grenade launchers, M14s, M16s, this is the program through which they get them. And there don't seem to be any checks and balances on this. According to the Government Accountability Office, they did a test. They set up a fake website for a fake police department. They gave its street address as an empty lot, and they applied for surplus weapons. And this totally fake agency was handed $1.2 million worth of military weapons, including night vision goggles, simulated rifles, simulated pipe bombs. And the simulated rifles could be turned into working weapons modified with commercially available items. I mean, that's just insane. It's just insane. All right, let's turn to the economic news here. The IMF has downgraded both the British and United States growth forecasts. They're seeing the economies getting into trouble now. With Great Britain, of course, they're looking at the potential ramifications of Brexit. But apparently the IMF has revised down the U.S. growth forecast from 2.3% to 2.1%, which doesn't sound like much. But to the world of economists and financial planners, that is a pretty significant hit. Now, there's another story coming on out. This is at Zero Hedge. Apparently, some mystery investors hidden behind corporate shells just made a $262 million bet that the stock market will crash by October. And apparently has gone on out there and is doing a ton of short selling or buying of derivatives. We can hope that he's going to be wrong and will be hideously embarrassed, but we're seeing all these indicators that It's just hanging by a thread. Apparently, Deutsche Bank has now decided they want to shift $350 billion worth of their assets from London back to Frankfurt. They want it under their control before it, too, gets locked up in the Brexit. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Getting on back to the economic news, as you know, the U.S. Congress is pushing for a whole new round of sanctions on Russia because they're acting aggressively. They're aggressing all over the place. They're aggressing in Canada, they're aggressing in Mexico, they're aggressing here in Hawaii, they're aggressing all over the place. And a lot of pressure being put on Donald Trump to sign the legislation if it goes on through, and it probably will. Got overwhelming support. We're going to sanction everybody. We're going to... Those other countries, you know what they're going to say? Go ahead, sanction us. You don't have anything we want to buy. We can't sell you anything. Your people don't have any money. Sanction away. We could care less. Well, one group that is very concerned about more sanctions is the European Union. Because remember, every time the United States has come out with more sanctions, Europe pays for it. They're cut off from Russian markets. They're cut off from Russian suppliers. It has caused all kinds of harm. There were these major protests in France where farmers who were growing food for export to Russia couldn't sell their product. And it was just sitting there rotting. So they dumped it all in front of the government buildings. Germany is threatening retaliation, meaning they're going to start sanctioning the United States government or the United States economy. We're moving into an economic war. And the danger there is that economic wars can very quickly turn into real shooting wars, and Germany is supposed to be on our side. It's amazing. Germany's stock market just crashed to the lowest level in a month. Apparently the car makers are in a crisis. Apparently part of it is a new diesel emission scandal. And apparently investors are dumping Volkswagen, Daimler, and BMW stock because apparently all three of those companies are caught up in a new emissions rigging scandal. And the other reason the German automakers are in trouble is because the United States used to be one of their major markets. And people cannot afford to buy German cars anymore. Can't even afford to buy American cars, even at these amazing prices we're seeing on the commercials. Getting on back down to Venezuela, Venezuela's current socialist government is finding that the anti-government protests are becoming more and more violent. Apparently more than 100 people have been killed so far. The U.S. just embargoed Venezuelan oil, just cut them all off. And Venezuela could be the first sovereign oil producer to see an all-out economic collapse. If you're an oil-producing nation, ultimately you can never go broke because you got that giant piggy bank deep in the earth. Now, over in Bolivia, their president, Evo Morales, has succeeded in doing what Hungary did not too long ago. They have managed to pay off and break free from the World Bank and the IMF. And Morales has declared total independence from these giant central banks. And he's basically citing the detrimental impact the nation has had to suffer from being enslaved to these private central banks. So Bolivia just made the special high interest targets list, and I'd be willing to bet a whole 5 cents that we're going to start to see destabilization efforts against Morales in Bolivia. Oh, he's a horrible leader. He refuses to be a slave to the central bankers. We've got to take him out. Now, speaking of Hungary, their Prime Minister Orban is out there saying that George Soros and the European Union leadership are literally striving for a mixed Muslimized Europe. And basically, Orban is saying Soros is now more powerful in Brussels than he is in Washington or Tel Aviv. Actually, Soros and Israel are kind of on the outs right now. And Orban is saying that European institutions should work to limit Soros' influence because he's not an elected official. He just has a lot of money. And having a lot of money does not give anybody the right to control our planet. They believe that it does. They act like it does. But that's not what democracy is supposed to be here. Apparently, in this pushback against George Soros, the latest victim there is Poland. The European Union is literally threatening to strip Poland of its sovereignty because they're anti-Soros. In other words, the EU is telling Poland, we'll take away the name Poland, you'll just be kind of like this unincorporated blank area on the map because you're standing up to George Soros. Now, over in Germany, as they are seeing here in the United States, the influx of refugees has triggered a sharp rise in infectious diseases that had previously been eradicated. Now, this is a new report from the Robert Koch Institute. This is the government's central institution for monitoring and preventing diseases, and it says there's been an across-the-board rise in diseases since 2015. Because these refugees are being allowed into Europe and the United States without checking to see if they're carrying highly contagious diseases. And as a result, here in the United States at least, we have actually had cases of bubonic plague show up. Drug-resistant tuberculosis, scabies is now an epidemic. More HIV coming on in, H1N1. What happens when somebody comes across that border with the Ebola virus? Oh, so a few million of you die horrible, painful deaths. It's a small price to pay for the New World Order and the global government. It's a sacrifice we are willing to make here. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And down in Houston, there's been this horrible, it was in San Antonio, this horrible incident. Apparently, police were checking out this 18-wheeler trailer parked behind a Walmart in San Antonio, and they found it stuffed with migrants, illegal immigrants, people smugglers. 8 people had died, and another 30 were in serious shape from heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and apparently this trailer did not have air conditioning, did not even have a water supply, and they're basically illegal immigrants who had just arrived in America. Now, the driver has been charged in the 8 deaths for manslaughter, and he should be. And the driver was James Matthew Bradley. And here's another point. That truck could have been full of terrorists. Didn't anybody think to actually look inside as it came across the border? What if that truck had been carrying a nuclear weapon? What if that truck had been carrying tanks of anthrax? It's rather amazing to have a government that has made big business out of security at the airports and fondling us and body scanners and going through our luggage. Now they want to ban laptops from the cabin. And yet that southern border is wide open. Now, do you remember last month there was this collision late at night between the Aegis cruiser, guided missile destroyer, the USS Fitzgerald, and a Philippine cargo ship. And my read of the situation at the time was that the Fitzgerald ignored the rules of navigation, the right-of-way, because there's a pecking order on who gets to go first, who has to pull back. And those giant supercarriers and supertankers are right at the top because they cannot turn and slow down very quickly. And the Fitzgerald just thought, we'll just scoot in front of them. and they miscalculated, and they hit. And, of course, we had all these defenders of the Navy coming on out and saying, oh, no, this was a deliberate attack by the Philippine ship. They wanted to sink the Fitzgerald. Oh, those evil Philippine people. Well, the official U.S. Navy investigation has started, and they are acknowledging the U.S. Navy is at fault. And apparently, according to two defense officials in an interview on CNN, the crew aboard the USS Fitzgerald made numerous abysmal mistakes which led to the collision with the ACX Crystal in an area that is known to be a corridor for commercial shipping. And so somebody's career in the Navy has just ended, probably several somebodies. And they're saying just a whole bunch of things went wrong. Now, my question is, somewhere along command track, you would think that anybody who is going to be given the con on this ship is going to be basically given the same kind of training that any ship captain anywhere is going to get. Even private owners of yachts above a certain tonnage, you have to get your master's papers. It's like a driver's license. And to get those master's papers, you have to know certain things, including that order of right of way. And we keep seeing these collisions over and over again. I remember some years back when the USS Greenville rammed and sank that teaching ship. This Japanese fishing boat, it was a teaching boat, was filled with all these young kids. And the day before it had happened, it had been tied up down at the Aloha Tower. And that was back when I was working on Final Fantasy. And I would take my lunch at the Aloha Tower. So I saw the ship and I saw the kids. And said hi and helped them take pictures and practiced my very, very poor Japanese on them. They were nice kids. And the next day, boom. I remember when the Kursk was sunk. And the initial reports were that a U.S. submarine that was spying on the exercise accidentally rammed them. There are a lot of submarine rammings. I think if somebody wanted to say where the weakest part of naval combat is, it's in our sensor systems for the immediate vicinity. Oh, yeah, we got long-range radar and satellite and AUTEX sonar and everything. They don't seem to have a clear picture of what is right around them. And that may be an area that needs a little bit of development so that these things don't run into each other. Okay, getting on back to Attorney General Jeff Sessions and his war on marijuana and various other things. And by the way, the deep state is already on the attack. Now that Trump has asked Sessions to look into Hillary's links to Russia, the deep state is out there. They're attacking him. Oh, he's political. He's this. He should resign. They're in a panic out there. They are in a panic out there. And one of the things Sessions has done that I do not agree with is he's setting up a new civil forfeiture directive that will allow police departments in states that are trying to impose restrictions to go around them by allowing the federal government to adopt the civil forfeiture case. More and more states are passing laws saying you cannot take the wealth of these people until you have convicted them of a crime, which is the way civil forfeiture was originally supposed to work. Civil forfeiture was brought into existence as a way of stripping known convicted criminals of the wealth they acquired with their criminal activity. Makes perfect sense, but as with everything else in this country, it gets turned into a racket. And police departments are now funding themselves in part by just taking money from anybody they encounter on the street. If you're carrying too much cash, I'm sorry, you're probably a drug dealer, we're going to take the money. And so the state governments have tried to impose common sense restriction. You cannot take somebody's money, you can't take their house, you can't take their car until they are convicted of a crime. And Jeff Sessions, the Department of Justice, has put out this new forfeiture directive that allows the Department of Justice to adopt these seizure cases and carry out the seizures and then send at least part of the money back to the originating police departments. We literally have a United States government that has been reduced to plundering and pillaging and looting its own citizens. That's how broke they are. That's how much in debt they are. They're just going on out and looking for targets of opportunity to just take the money. So let's get on over to the world of political correctness, if you will. Political correctness gone wild. Not too long ago, there was a case in California where this 36-year-old teacher was convicted of having sex with one of her students under the legal age of consent, and she was, convicted for the crime, and she got a lot of negative press in the newspaper. She has now turned around and sued the teenage boy for defamation, saying that the statements made by the young man in the media hurt her reputation and her career. Now, I can't imagine any judge going along with that, but this is California, and those judges in California can make some pretty bizarre decisions out there. But if this teacher was concerned about her reputation and her career, maybe she should have kept her hands off this kid in the first place. But I mean, talk about insult to injury. Now, I imagine the student probably wasn't all that upset about what was going on. But there is a law, age of consent. And to then this teacher turn around and act like he's the bad guy for talking to the press. It shows how far we have deteriorated as a moral society. I mean, again, when I was young, somebody got caught in a scandal like that, they'd hush up. They'd want it to go away. They certainly wouldn't blame the victim. But these days it seems like everybody's out there suing everybody, trying to assert their particular point of view about why they're the victim and the other guy is the person who did wrong. The lawyers love it. I'm sure they're making money hand over fist. We've become an incredibly litigious society. It almost seems like the lawsuit has become the dominant form of social interaction in our country. Remember, you used to meet singles at the supermarket, at the art museum. Now you meet them at the courthouse. Now, there has been a long, dragged-out lawsuit going all the way back to George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and their war in Iraq, and the abuses of a infamous government contractor, Kellogg, Brown, and Root. And they were delivering horrible water to our soldiers. We have a family member who was serving in Iraq, and we would send these water filter pitchers and just cases of the filters, because the filters wouldn't last more than a day with the horrible water Kellogg Brown Root was delivering. And Kellogg Brown Root was soaking the taxpayer tens of thousands of dollars per tank of water. And there were other abuses. And apparently one of the big cases were the so-called open burn pits in Iraq, where they took Kellogg Brown Root was taking all of these captured weapons, including chemical weapons, and putting them in the burn pits, and the nearby soldiers who were breathing the smoke came down ill. A lot of it was called Gulf War syndrome, and the government said, oh, it's just in your head, we don't need to pay your medical bills. So the families of these soldiers sued Kellogg Brown Root, saying it was your practice of these open burn pits and a reckless disregard for who was downwind that led to this. Now, Kellogg Brown Root was part of Dick Cheney's corporate empire under Halliburton at the time. And they made billions of dollars off of this stuff. They were burning everything in there. Tires, lithium batteries, asbestos insulation, pesticide containers, styrofoam, metal, paints, plastic, medical waste, even human corpses. And so these families have sued because the cost of the medical care of these returned veterans has been horrendous. More about this when we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about this case against Kellogg Brown Root, which was part of Halliburton, which was owned by Dick Cheney. The lawsuit was brought by the families of these Iraq War veterans who were made extremely ill by these open burn pits that were used to burn just about everything imaginable. And these soldiers came down ill. It was called Gulf War Syndrome. The U.S. government simply abandoned these veterans and said, it's all in your head. We're not responsible for your medical costs. So the family sued Kellogg Brown Root. It's been dragging on in the courts for years and years and years. Last Friday, on the basis that the United States courts do not have jurisdiction over military battlefield decisions, the federal judge just threw all the lawsuits out. Just tossed them on out. Because after all, you can't sue corporations. You can't sue Dick Cheney. If you sign up for the military, bad things are going to happen to you. Just get used to it up front and all will be well. By the way, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443 if you want to call on in. Over at Fukushima, that is simply lingering on here. And they have been trying to get robots into the reactors to see what's really going on there. And the radiation in there is so intense, the robots are literally frying the electronics despite all the shielding. In many cases, the robots are not designed to deal with the piles of wreckage, and they get hung up. But finally, technicians were able to deploy what's called a swimming robot. This is an underwater, remotely operated vehicle shielded from the radiation. And they were finally able to swim down into the pool of water at the bottom of the reactor number 3, and to see these massive deposits of melted nuclear fuel, which has basically aggregated into these huge blocks of nuclear fuel plus reactor debris plus debris from the containment plus debris from the reactors themselves. It's taken them 6 years just to get this far, which ought to give you an idea of just how long it's going to be before they can really clean this mess up. But Japan's already encouraging people to move back into the area, and they're still dumping highly contaminated wastewater into the Pacific Ocean because they don't know what else to do with it. And apparently in the wake of what they discovered with this swimming robot, TEPCO is now acknowledging that, yes, number 3 reactor did in fact breach containment. Now, most of the observers of the Fukushima meltdown had pretty much concluded that it happened. TEPCO kept insisting that no, reactor 3, yes, it had suffered huge amounts of damage, but everything was still in the containment. Well, no, that definitely was not what was going on over there. Okay, we're going to grab a phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, 2007 through 2009, I was an HR country manager for Kellogg Brown & Root over in Kuwait and Iraq.
Okay.
And have very intimate knowledge of this lawsuit and what went on and all that. I will tell you that everybody knew the burn pits were toxic. Nobody wanted to be around them. The water, as you say, was awful.
Yes.
Dick Cheney was not the owner; he was the CEO.
Okay.
That's where he was, Mike, before he was tasked to find a vice president for George Bush and put himself forward. Remember?
Yeah, I remember.
Among other things, KBR covered up rapes, and also they were in charge of all construction. I mean, all construction, all the billeting, everything, all the fortifications, and there were also numerous deaths because of the faulty wiring, where soldiers would take showers in their hooch and get electrocuted. So there's all sorts of stuff going on. It was very, very...
And they were just raking the dough in. They were just raking the dough in on all of this stuff. I remember that there was a story where the ordinary soldiers were actually forbidden to do their own laundry because Kellogg, Brown & Root had the contract to do laundry services for the soldiers, and I think it was billed out at $100 per bag of laundry or some insane amount like that.
I'm the one that told you that, I think.
Oh, okay.
Mike, yeah, that's
all right.
right.
Well, Peter, stay on the line. Going to bring you right back after this commercial break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Peter in Los Angeles. We're talking about all the abuses of Kellogg Brown Root. But then this country has a long history of massive war profiteering by corporations at the expense of the soldiers and the taxpayers. But Kellogg Brown Root just took it to a whole new level. Again, our soldiers, service people in the war zone, it's not enough. They're facing bullets from the enemy. Their own infrastructure support was a threat. The showers that were electrocuting people, and especially when you look at how much money was being paid for these, and then to realize they're little more than shacks, obviously there was a lot of price gouging going on.
Well, the little history on this, Mike, is that when I first went into the military, I mean, I'm your age. I was one of the last draftees and went to OCS and all that kind of thing. But that was in '72. And back then, there were Army transportation battalions, truck battalions, that they would follow any spearhead and so on and so forth. And KBR then took all the trucking, supply trucking was done by KBR in the Middle East. Also, they had, along with the water and all the dining facilities. So the food, the water, the shelter, I told you they built all the construction, as well as the laundry, as you pointed out. It started to change back when Dick Cheney was the Secretary of Defense in the first Gulf War, which I was also there for, at that time in the military. And he started to outsource all this stuff, and it just got to the point, Mike, where everything that could be outsourced was. And so instead of, to give you one little vignette, even in '03 when we went in and there was a conventional invasion and you know, we were fighting remnants of the Iraqi army. I wasn't there yet, but that was the situation. KBR had the trucking that was following the spearheads with petroleum oil and lubricants and food and medicine and ammunition and so on and so forth. All the supplies you need. There were casualties taken. I think KBR, from the time I left, had several hundred casualties. But in the old days, when they had Army or military trucking battalions, and those guys, the drivers, were PFCs making maybe $500 a month. These guys were now making about $120,000 a month because it was dangerous work, $120,000 a year, excuse me. And when they took mortar rounds or fire or what have you, they could just quit, Mike.
Yes.
In the old days when it was run by the military, literally under Uniform Code of Military Justice, in the face of the enemy, you could take that PFC out of there and shoot him if you really had to. Well, these guys could quit, and they just went home. And the spearheads, or the guys in the remote outposts that needed, you know, their ammo and their medicine and their food, they may be screwed. So
they were just abandoning the trucks there in the middle of the desert, which means the enemy could come in and just avail themselves of all that material supply.
Well, yeah, there was never in that kind of numbers, but it was like singly, one at a time. There'd be drivers who would just say, "I'm not going any further." But as you pointed out many times, that war is a business here, and this is what we do as a country. That's what we do. We do war, but we have now constructed it so that it's so inefficient. Where, you know, all the mess halls, back when PFCs used to ladle out the mashed potatoes, and they did that for $500 a month. Now those guys were making, back in 2007, 2008, they were making $84,000 a year to ladle out the mashed potatoes in a mess hall. So it's become too expensive, even to fight a war where nobody really was shooting back at you. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Everything was part of it. It now is this giant money-sucking machine. And God forbid we ever go up against anybody who can really fight.
Yeah, I mean, that degree of corruption in the military-industrial complex is going to be a problem. And again, nothing new. We saw a lot of this during World War II. Remember the captains of industry? All these business executives who volunteered to manage infrastructure and supply, and they took a token pay of something like $10. But as soon as the war was over, they basically literally stole these warehouses full of all this material, and they went out and started new businesses with it. So yeah, it's just this huge, and I saw it again when I was involved with NASA and the Air Force, huge amounts of waste, and just, you have to see it to believe just how much money flows through the hands of anybody connected with the military. Anything else, Peter?
I got one more thing to say.
Sure.
Right now they're talking about, apparently Jared Kushner and Bannon have put forth the proposition that Afghanistan should be turned over to contractors, one of which is DynCorp, who I also work for, and the other one is like, what's his name, Eric Prince from the old Blackwater.
Yes.
They're trying to push this idea of running the whole war over there with contractors rather than putting in more troops. And that is a complete, it's so indicative of where we are, but it's a complete recipe for utter disaster.
It absolutely.
How do you have a foreign policy? Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, again, going on back to the fact, these contractors can just quit and walk away whenever they want, and they certainly cost a lot more than ordinary soldiers. And I imagine they probably have much more expensive equipment that is chosen simply because it is much more expensive. That probably all of this is being bid under what's called a cost-plus contract, which is the more expensive.
Cost plus 3.
Yeah, the more expensive they make the delivered goods, the larger the margin of profit for the original defense corporation. And again, look at how the costs spiraled out of control on the F-35. And there's a stark reality that nobody seems to be thinking about, and that is, in any war, anywhere, the country that runs out of money first loses. And our military is just spending money left and right like crazy, and it doesn't guarantee us a military superiority when you factor in how much waste and outright lost. Something like $6 trillion has vanished from the Pentagon in total, and nobody has any idea where it went. So we may spend more on the military than the next 25 countries combined. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have the military forces to stand up to a peer like Russia and or China.
Mike, if I can just say one more thing, and that is, we're this contractor mercenary thing to go through, and it's still, being proposed. How do you end a war like that? When you have the company that's running the whole thing that's making a fortune on it, what does victory, victory for them is having it go on forever.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, to an extent, we saw that in Vietnam. They just dragged that one on and on and on and on to soak the American taxpayer for money for helicopters and M16s and the rest of it. And that was it. There have been so many wars we probably could have won very, very easily, but they're turned into quagmires because it maximizes the profit for the defense contractors. We could be seeing exactly the same thing going on in Yemen, in Libya, same thing in Syria. The longer these wars go on, the more money is taken from the American people and given to the defense contractors.
And Mike, how do you have a foreign policy that way when they're doing? How do you handle atrocities? All this stuff? It's just, I mean.
Well, our government's already ignoring the atrocities. Our government's attitude is there are no atrocities. We can't be prosecuted for war crimes. And that was one of the real red warning signs all the way back under Bush and Cheney, was the U.S. State Department was going to all these other countries around the world and signing treaties saying that U.S. officials and military officers could not be arrested on their soil and transferred to the international court. And that right there was, they were planning on doing things that were violations of international law.
We're in a bad place, Mike. That's for sure.
We absolutely are. We are. Peter, we're going to let you go here. We're going to switch over to Mike in FEMA Region 10. Thank you for waiting so patiently. What is on your mind today? Okay, we lost Mike, so let's go to Rick in Vancouver. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Rick. Thanks, Mike. You know, when you talked, you remember you talked about Leonard Peltier a few times?
Yes.
I actually was just a few feet away from him. You know, when he fled the United States, he came up into Canada.
Yes.
And he came right to my university and was taking anthropology. I'll just ask you for forgiveness right now on that. But and my professor was involved in his case, and so he came up there, and he was, you know, a fugitive and so on. But he was just a few feet away from. Every time you talk about it, I always think about that. But I'm phoning for another reason, Mike. I know you're a stickler for historical detail.
Yes.
And earlier when you were talking about the Temple Mount, you mentioned something about the UN and Israel.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure you know this, but Israel wasn't created by the UN. Israel, it was a unilateral declaration on the part of the Zionists. And there was no foreign power or organization that created Israel.
Well, it's a gray area because the United Nations had come up with a partition plan, which Israel rejected. But the UN Security Council has repeatedly declared Jerusalem an international city that has to be shared with these four areas. And every time Israel grabs another chunk of East Jerusalem, they are in violation of UN Security Council resolution. And even Tzipi Livni is out there saying if Netanyahu keeps pushing on this, he's going to ignite a war all across the region.
I totally agree with you on that, Mike. But I mean that it's a little bit worse that the United Nations actually didn't create Israel. They did propose a plan, but the plan never went to the Security Council. And so it's not, it just like in Congress, the bill didn't go through, you know, all the processes to become a bill. So, technically, the United Nations does not have the power to create a country, and it never has in the history of the United Nations. So and that's part of the standard Zionist narrative that the UN created Israel, but it didn't. Now, speaking of which, too, there's a book called The Case Against Israel.
Yes.
By a professor named Michael Newman, and it is by far the best book I've ever read about Israel. I've read several. I lived in the Middle East, and it's really an excellent book. I recommend it to all of your listeners. It's relatively short. You can get it on PDF on the Internet, and I think it helps everybody understand the deep history. So thank you very much, Mike. You always do a good job, and we'll talk to you again sometime.
All right, thanks an awful lot, Rick. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to switch over to Sean in Seattle. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How's it going, Mike? Just wondered if, just tuned in, I was wondering if you were aware of and the Israel.
Okay, can you speak a little closer to the microphone because your phone call is dropping out? And
Yes, sir.
Isn't it wonderful living with third world technology? You wanted to talk about Senate Bill 720, and this is obviously a very dangerous piece of legislation where the U.S. Congress, on behalf of Israel, rather than the American people, want to criminalize support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And there are already several states that have attempted to pass these laws. They never go anywhere because it's an obvious violation of the First Amendment. And the fact that they're pushing this bill right now, even though you would think the Supreme Court will take it down on First Amendment grounds, suggests a new campaign to modify the First Amendment itself, to go before the Supreme Court and say, well, the American people do want certain exemptions to the First Amendment. Such as hate speech and so forth and so on. So this is an attack by Israel on the very foundations of our country, because Israel doesn't want anybody talking about what Israel is doing. And they have been shouting anti-Semite and Jew hater for so long, they've worn them out. Nobody cares anymore. It's lost its shock value. And so now Israel is going around the world getting their pet-owned governments to pass all these laws to say, you can't talk about Israel anymore. You can talk about anybody. You can criticize your own politicians, your own leadership, but don't you dare say anything about Israel, or we're going to throw you in jail for a hate crime.
That's it.
Yeah, that's basically...
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. I wish it was unbelievable, but, you know, Israel is just on a move to just take over the entire world and you know, basically treat us like the Goyim. And this whole idea of declaring criticism of the actions of the government of Israel as anti-Semitism makes about as much sense as defending the actions of the Nazis by saying you just hate the German people.
I couldn't believe Ron Wyden apparently is a co-sponsor, and the House introduced a bill on the very same day, or two other bills, and they've got 230-some co-sponsors in the House.
Oh,
already.
Yeah, the Congress can't agree on health care, but whatever Israel wants, Israel's going to get.
Right. Sad day. Anyway,
yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your opinion on that, Mike. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Yeah, it is a very scary piece of legislation. It is going to pass the Congress, and I am concerned that Donald Trump will sign it because he's pro-Israel. Now, I'm going to rely on the existing United States Supreme Court decision, Marbury versus Madison. Laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. But they wouldn't be pushing for this hard in Congress unless there was some kind of a plan to get around the Supreme Court and change that First Amendment. Now, technically, the only way they can change the First Amendment is with a new amendment. But we are seeing a Supreme Court that has been legislating from the bench, and I'm concerned that the new Supreme Court may just go along and say, yes, you have freedom of speech about anything except Israel. You can't talk about Israel. Don't you dare talk about Israel. That's what it's coming on down to. Getting on back to political correctness, apparently over at Planned Parenthood, they are making changes to their websites. And in the section that is sort of aimed at very young people, they're now pushing this idea that your private parts do not make you a boy or a girl. They're out there pushing this idea of a non-binary model of sexuality, that it doesn't matter what your body is, what you think you are inside is what you are. Again, they're just trying to get us all confused about who we are so that we are easier to control. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And following Peter in Los Angeles' call, I'm getting all these stories sent to me about just how much profiteering was going on with Kellogg, Brown, and Root. Somebody just sent me a link to a PDF that's on the Senate's website. It's on their website, and it's talking about how all of these unjustified costs and expenses that Halliburton, Kellogg, Brown, and Root were billing the U.S. government for during the war. Every single gallon of gas for all military equipment was billed out at $1,700 per gallon. A case of soft drink was billed at $1,200. Halliburton and Kellogg, Brown, and Root made a fortune off of the American people. Because after all, there's a war on, and we've got to shovel the money into the fire as fast as we can. Which is a quote from that movie, The Pentagon Wars, where Kelsey Graham is playing the lead antagonist, and he's out there defending the spending on the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, saying, we defeated the Soviet Union because we could shovel the money into the fire faster than they could. And it's funny because we recognize that's almost the attitude. Anything the Pentagon is trying to do, as long as we can spend more money on it, sooner or later, it's going to work on out. Now, if you're like me, you're a big fan of Johnny Depp. He's an amazing actor. It takes on all these different characters. Big fan of the Pirates movies. And he's out there talking about global warming and how we have to bring it under control. and critics are pointing on out, Johnny Depp has 14 homes and a private jet. Now, at the moment, he is apparently involved with a lawsuit with his former business managers. Apparently, Johnny Depp, for all of the success in the movies, he's in financial trouble. He's sued his business managers saying they've defrauded him. The business managers have come on back and said, no, it's his lavish spending. 14 houses, private jets, not their fault. This one's going to be in the court for years and years and years and years. Now, do you remember last year when Hillary Clinton was launching a campaign and she promised she was going to run a carbon-neutral campaign, that she was going to purchase carbon credits to offset all the carbon dioxide emitted from her private jet travel? Well, apparently a review of federal election filings has found she never did it. She said it because she knew that's what her supporters wanted to hear. Oh, she's carbon neutral. Isn't she wonderful? She never did it. She was out there in her private jet spewing out carbon and completely unconcerned. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We've got a caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back.
Right away. Log on now for a special radio offer from Angioprim. That's angioprim.com/radio. ANGIOPRIM. Angioprim.com/radio or call 877-882-7221. That's 877-882-7221.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network. Because you can handle the truth.
What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to take a phone call from Tony down in Puerto Rico. Aloha, Tony. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Aloha, Mike. Yeah, I have a quick comment, Mike. What do you think was the turning point in the American Revolutionary War? Was it Washington attacking the Hessians at Trenton, or the French coming into the war?
Probably the French coming into the war, General Lafayette. I think most people probably realized that the fall of Yorktown and the surrender of General Lord Cornwallis represented the turning point. Where from that point on, the British failed to make any gains whatsoever, and it was just became a mop-up operation to get them off of our country.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. And even so, let's see, I think it wasn't until 1793 that Great Britain finally said, okay, you're your own independent country. Spoil sports. Now, this story just came on in, going on back to the political stuff. This is coming out of bigleaguepolitics.com, and as of right now, I'm not seeing a confirmation. It may not require one because it makes absolute sense. And apparently, attorneys in Washington, D.C., are talking about the fact that Special Counsel Robert Mueller and the members of his team can be disbarred for waging the Russia case against President Donald Trump in light of their glaring conflicts of interest in the case. When you are a lawyer and you are asked to go on in on a legal action just whether you're a prosecutor, a defender, or the judge. If you have a conflict of interest, if you have connections with the people involved, you're supposed to say, I have to recuse myself. I know the defendant. I know the victim. And Mueller's team did not. They're tainted by clearly partisan political donations and activities. They're tainted with the direct relationships with former clients like Hillary Clinton, who is at the heart of most of these allegations that Russia stole the election from her and gave it to Donald Trump. And these conflicts clearly violate the guidelines of the American Bar Association. And again, we know that Hillary Clinton colluded with the Russians to sell them uranium, the Uranium One deal. Clinton handpicked Mueller to give a sample of that uranium to the Russians, and Mueller flew to Moscow, according to publicly available documents. He's in this mess up to his neck. Now, getting on back to human-caused global warming, Bill Nye, the not very science guy, and you need to remember Bill Nye's background. He's an actor. That was his early career. He's always been an actor, and he got cast to be an actor and a presenter on a science show, and he just decided, this is my new image. His actual training in the sciences is not impressive at all. So Bill Nye is out there, and he's fully on board on this idea of human-caused global warming. And his latest suggestion, as indicated by a statement made to the Los Angeles Times, is that old people must die to save the planet. And Bill Nye's rationale is that climate change deniers are older people. It's a generational problem. Yeah, because we've lived long enough to see that there isn't any global warming. So Bill Nye says we're just going to have to wait for these old climate change deniers to age out, which is a euphemism for die. In other words, Bill Nye wants everybody who doesn't agree with him to just die and go away. Stop interfering with his little fantasy of Al Gore and human-caused global warming. Which reminds me, Bill Nye is in his 60s. He's an old guy. Maybe he could lead by example. One of the articles we had on the website earlier today was pointing out that fake science is actually a bigger threat to our society than mere fake news. Fake news comes and it goes and it has its effect and that's it. But you start putting out fake science and you keep establishing it as this is the reality that we all must conform to. You can cause a lot of damage. And remember, science is far from perfect. That's why there is the scientific method. It's a self-check. Because scientists as individuals are just as corruptible as individual lawyers, politicians, and clergy. And the scientific method is a safeguard against somebody in a white lab coat coming on out and saying, this is reality and we're going to base our future tax policy on it. Science has made some pretty bad goofs in the past. Even Aristotle. Aristotle was the one who tossed an orange up in the air, caught it, and said, this proves the earth is not moving. Therefore, we are the center of the universe. Smart guy, had a lot of good ideas. He blew it on that one. Remember the earth-centered solar system that came out of Aristotle? And rather than question that official model, looking at the motions of the planets, they came up with the theory of epicycles. That hung on for 400 years. That's history's longest-running scientific goof. Remember, back in the 70s, they were predicting there was a coming ice age. Well, you wait long enough, you're going to get one. But we have a lot of fake science out there. Fake science selling you fake medicine, fake science selling you a fake environmental policy, and it goes on and on and on. All right, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining our network. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, apparently, there was an Android ransomware called S-Locker, and it mimicked WannaCry, and apparently the source code for this ransomware has been leaked online. which means anybody with ill intent who can get their hands on this source code, they can launch their own ransomware campaign. And I'm willing to bet Android is going to get hit with a ton of these. Every script kiddie living in their parents' basement is going to be cranking out their ransomware and collecting the bitcoins. Now, I've talked a lot about the so-called Internet of Things, how it's not only unnecessary, it's actually decadent. And it's also very insecure. When you're talking about having a computer in a coffee pot, you don't think about needing to protect it from hackers. What are they going to do? Call on in and tell the coffee maker to make 6 cups of coffee instead of 4? But it turns out there is a vulnerability. And apparently there was a hacker attack on a casino here in the United States. And the hackers were able to get into the casino's local area network by hacking through a Internet of Things fish tank that was connected to the Internet. This is all coming from a company called Darktrace. And even though they had set up extra security precautions on the fish tank, hackers still managed to compromise the computer inside the aquarium to send data to a device in Finland before they were found and stopped. So there's a good reason to avoid this Internet of Things stuff. All of them are vulnerabilities. And right now we're living in a country where the government could care less if you're being victimized by ransomware or identity theft, because it's more big business. You're forced to buy security software. You're forced to buy identity theft protection. It's all about sucking more money out of you. That's why they don't want the crime to stop. Remember what one of the callers was saying. Once you turn over the wars to private contractors, they'll keep the war going as long as they can because they're making more money that way. The same thing is happening here. They don't want the cybercrime problem to go away because the companies that are selling security software and identity theft protection, they're making a lot of money. It's a racket. It is a racket. Now, as you know, Trump has come on out pushing for the Senate to have a health care vote, hopefully this week. Supposedly, Congress is not going to be allowed to leave on their August recess until this matter is resolved. Rand Paul is already out there saying that they're dealing with the problem with the current Trump care that they dealt with the original Obamacare. They don't know what's in it. Remember when Nancy Pelosi came on out and said we had to vote for it before we could see what was in it? What a ridiculous way to be passing legislation. What if the original Obamacare had said, every third American has a legal right to take a 2x4 and whack Nancy Pelosi over the head? Would have been the letter of the law. She would have voted for it. Now, there's a very alarming story. This came on out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. And nobody's going to tell you the truth about yourself faster than somebody who doesn't really like you, because you're not going to see this in the American corporate media. And apparently, over in Virginia, they have got such a backlog on their existing healthcare services, they have taken over a fairground and turned it into a makeshift clinic to deal with the U.S. healthcare crisis. Part of which is caused by these toxic food additives, part of which is caused by all these new illnesses being brought in across the border with the refugees. And they have these patients, some of them in their 90s, are traveling miles to be seen to by doctors, and they're literally being kept in animal stalls, articulated lorries, and barns where they are examined and treated. You see the photos of this thing. This is something you'd expect to see in a war zone or over in Sudan or someplace else in the third world. It's right here in the United States of America. We have the most expensive health care on earth. Look at those photos and see what it looks like. And again, the same thing applies here. The medical industrial complex does not want you to be healthy. They do not want you to be cured. Curing a patient is a bad business model. You want to constantly treat them over and over and over and over again because that guarantees the flow of money. And we can drop the blame for this one back on Richard Nixon because he signed that Health Maintenance Organization bill on behalf of his good buddy that was running Kaiser Permanente. And that bill transformed medical care from a service that would perform the service for a limited markup fee and turned it into a new get-rich-quick scheme. And boy, did they ever. Story coming out of Natural News. There's been yet another study, this one over at Leiden University, that has shown there is zero evidence that people put on statin drugs have any increase in survival. Now, this paper written by Dr. Esther Van Zuren she's saying it's time we look at the evidence and stop letting the pharmaceutical companies and food industry pull the wool over our eyes. The paper goes on to say that quitting statins could actually save more lives and improve the quality of life for people who take them, pointing out that statins, which don't increase your lifespan, cause side effects in 29% of users. And all they offer is the illusion of cardiovascular protection for those people who are obese. These drugs do not help those who have had a heart attack. They fail to provide benefits when used as a preventative measure. It's a totally useless drug. And more than that, it's dangerous. It's supposed to slowly erode the plaque from your arteries. And it doesn't. It causes it to break off in large chunks, some of which wind up in very inconvenient places. And my youngest brother was 10 years my junior. Like so many other people in our generation, was overweight. And he lost a lot of weight. He was getting out there, was hiking, looking really good. And then he got his regular medical checkup, and the doctor said, "Oh, you need statins." And 3 months later, he suffered a stroke. And a year after that, he died. Now, speaking of obesity, and I'm not just thumping on that issue because I just finished losing 100 pounds. Story coming on out from Oraz.com. British and American girls are the fattest in the world. More than half of young females carry dangerous stomach fat in the UK and the US, putting them at risk of diabetes and cancer. And have you noticed the PCers in the United States? You know, this idea, you shouldn't make fun of fat people. You know, you should just accept them as they are. This obsession with skinny girls, that's ridiculous. You're making them feel bad. You should lust after the fat girls to make them feel better about themselves. No, we should realize that the obesity epidemic in this country is a problem. And it has nothing to do with the lifestyles of the people who are obese and everything to do with chemicals added to the food that cause you to eat more than you should, because it maximizes the profits to the food corporations. Monosodium glutamate. It's sold, it's advertised as a flavor enhancer. The food will taste better. What it actually does is it interferes with the signal going to the brain that says, I have had enough to eat. Little side story on that one. When scientists need overweight rats to do obesity research on, they have to dose the food with monosodium glutamate, because normal rats in the cage will only eat enough to maintain their ideal body weight. Rats in the lab, in the cage, or in the wild never get fat. They never get overweight. The food has to be dosed with MSG to get them to overeat. And it does exactly the same thing to people. That's why food manufacturers love monosodium glutamate. And they have all these different euphemisms. So they're required by law to have the ingredients on the label, but they don't want to just say monosodium glutamate because too many people are looking out for it. In addition to the problem with overeating, it also has some other health issues to it. It's a migraine trigger. So they call it autolyzed yeast extract or hydrolyzed yeast protein or all these other different names. You can go online with a search engine and just say, what are the list of ingredient names that indicate added monosodium glutamate? Because there is natural occurring monosodium glutamate, but it's in small amounts. But the food manufacturers love this chemical because if they can get you to eat it, you're going to eat a lot more than you normally would. That means you're going back to the supermarket faster to buy more product. And they just want to shove this stuff into everything. Now, another bad one, of course, is aspartame, which is sold as a diet aid, as a sugar substitute. Before it was declared safe as a sugar substitute, it was actually considered a neurological bioweapon. And the problem with aspartame is that it causes your body to crave real carbohydrates, because it's one of these molecules that sort of kind of maybe fits where something should go, and the body says, no, that's not right, I need the real one. That's why you'll very often see these bundled deals at the supermarket where there's a liter of diet soda loaded up with aspartame, and it's bundled with these large bags of corn chips. More money, more money, more money, more money. High fructose corn syrup has also been shown to interfere with the signal to the brain, I have had enough to eat. In a certain percentage of the population, it can also trigger hypoglycemia in people who can eat regular plant sugar without a problem. Then you have all the hormones that are being pumped into cattle and poultry to make them grow faster, put on more mass, to get more product. But if those hormones are not fully metabolized when the animal is harvested, then people who are eating that, the hormone's going to do the same thing to them. And of course, the hormones are also coming on out in the dairy products and the eggs as well. That's where our obesity epidemic is coming from. If you're my age, think back to when you were a kid. How many really obesely fat people did you ever see in your life? And now it's common. We're being told to just accept that this is the way the world is. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And for those of you who are parents, you've probably gone through the very early ritual of buying baby food for your baby. And you know it's very expensive. Those little jars are very, very costly. And it turns out that even there, you may not be getting what you think you're getting. The general idea of baby food is that it is somehow healthier, better for your baby than anything else that you could make at home. But it may not be. And there's a lawsuit going on down in Australia involving the Heinz toddler food, particularly the Little Kids Shreds brand. And the issue is this idea that the packaging of the product features pictures of fruits and vegetables and states that the food inside this baby food jar is 99% fruits and vegetables. But apparently lab analysis has shown that this product contains 68.7 grams of pure sugar for every 100 grams of the food itself. In other words, it's 2/3 sugar. The court was actually saying there's so much sugar in here, it qualifies as a confectionery. It could be marketed as a candy. They want to get the consumers hooked on that sugar thing as early as possible. And again, this volume of sugar in the product even goes against Heinz Foods' stated guidelines for baby food. Now, all baby food really is, if you think about it, is the same food that you would eat, just chopped up really, really, really fine. And we have a family member who is a doctor and is in the process of starting a family. and she just makes her own baby food. She's got a blender. Put in, they've got gardens around them, farmers markets around them. Put in the fruits and the vegetables, hit puree. That's it. No added sugar. But we have reached a stage in the devolution of our country where corporations are literally being given license to misbrand products. Literally all over the world. And that's not a very good thing, because we're seeing governments, whether it's Australia or the United States or anywhere, putting corporate profits above the welfare of the general population. And that, my friends, is fascism. When government authority and corporate interests are aligned together against the general population, that is fascism. And that's not my definition. That goes back to Benito Mussolini, who was the Olympic gold medal winner for being a fascist jerk. So we're being sold medicines that are harmful and don't actually provide any benefit. We're being sold healthy baby food that is not necessarily healthy. We're being sold vaccines that don't really seem to protect anybody and have serious, serious side effects. I mean, look at the absurdity where you have this idea where mercury in fish is bad, but mercury injected into your kid's arm is good. Mercury in the environment is bad. Mercury injected into your kid's arm, that's good. The fact that it's an inconsistent benchmark. We can't have even the tiniest amount of mercury in the environment, but we're going to just pump it into your kid's arm. It's all about the money. So, let's get on over to the American Heart Association. And last month, the AHA once again came on out with this warning about not eating butter and not eating steak, and especially you should avoid coconut oil, saying that the saturated fats in these foods can cause heart disease. And the problem is that over the last several years, more and more outside independent scientists are taking a look at this and realizing saturated fats aren't the problem that they've been billed to be. And it's amazing because everybody's looking at the same data, and the American Heart Association is out there saying, yeah, this is a danger, this is a problem. You have to ask why. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're talking about how the American Heart Association has come on out once again demonizing butter, steak, and especially coconut oil, saying saturated fats are a major cause of heart attacks. And the underlying data doesn't really show that kind of a correlation. And so, according to this article that was over in the Los Angeles Times, the reporter sat down with a cardiologist and went through the nuts and bolts, and it quickly became obvious that this statement attacking butter, steak, and coconut oil was less driven by sound science and more driven by long-standing bias, overlapping commercial interests, and the American Heart Association's need to reaffirm the last 70 years of its heart-healthy advice. None of these organizations want to back up and say, ooh, gee, we were wrong. Because then people stop listening to them, people stop donating to them, people stop supporting them. And so because of that reality, you will have long disproven science persist, like human-caused global warming. Someday you ought to really go on out and look at what's in some of the things that people are buying and eating in this country. Ought to find out what's really in a hot dog. I'll give you a hint. There is no dog in it. There's a lot of other things. Twinkies, those snack cakes. A lot of the stuff that's in there isn't really food. So, now we've been talking a lot about prescription antidepressants, how expensive they are, how harmful they are to a certain segment of the population and to those people around them in the case of the mass shootings. But they're big business. They make a lot of money. But interestingly enough, over at the Lamer College of Medicine at the University of Vermont, there's been a nutritional study that has found that magnesium, getting a daily dose of magnesium, which you can get at the health food stores, 248 milligrams of magnesium leads to an astounding reversal of depression symptoms in study subjects. It's simple nutrition. It's not a complex chemical. It doesn't have a patent on it. But the research shows magnesium is effective at addressing symptoms, and it's a lot safer and it's easier on the wallet than the prescription therapies. This is coming out of Science Daily. And even corporate science is now admitting magnesium is a safe, affordable, and effective treatment for depression. So as a result, big pharmaceutical corporations are now ramping up that glitzy advertising on TV for their prescription antidepressants. Pay no attention to the natural means. Pay no attention to stuff you can do for yourself. You will come and you will give us your money, and we'll give you this stuff that we made up out of thin air and patented. Okay, now another area where people are very concerned about what they put in the mouth is produce and whether or not it's organic. And as you know, there's a lot of people who are very concerned that Amazon is taking over Whole Foods and that Whole Foods may not become the tremendous source for organic, natural food that it has been up until recent times. That Amazon simply wants to exploit the name and lure people on in, thinking that they're going to get safe organic food and just sell them the same inexpensive, adulterated, chemical-laden food that the regular supermarkets here. But as it turns out, there's a new study. A good reason for you to be eating organic produce is that all non-organic produce contain pesticides. Remember, as all of these pests evolve to tolerate the built-in toxins, the Bt, the glyphosate, farmers are having to go back to the older pesticides as well. And according to a new study, for some reason, strawberries absorb most of these chemicals into their interior. And a recent report found 20 synthetic chemicals inside strawberries purchased at a local supermarket. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Phone call, Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Oh, hi.
Hi.
Michael.
Yes.
Michael, hi. Aloha.
Can you turn your speaker down?
Well, okay, yes, that's a good idea.
Yes.
There, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you just fine.
Okay?
Yes.
Well, you were talking about food and nutrition and all these things, and I made a recent discovery about, you were talking about the signal to the brain that when you've had enough to eat.
Yes.
And I heard a piece a couple of days ago, and I've tried it, and it works. And it's the difference between probiotics, which most people know about. You know, I guess we get it like in fermented foods and yogurt and things like that. But there's also prebiotics, P-R-E, instead of probiotics. It's
yes.
Prebiotics. And this in the stomach signals I've had enough to eat.
Yes.
And I've tried it, and it works. I would suggest to people to Google prebiotics and see what they are. And the one that I have tried is raw garlic. And if I do some raw garlic on something, then and I put it in my dish, then I'm satisfied for a long time. I don't get hungry quickly.
Well, you know, there's something that people tend to forget in this age of corporate advertising and food storage and flying it around the world and everything. For most of humans' existence on Earth, our diet was dominated by what was available during certain times of the year. And there is a school of thought that says we will experience certain cravings for certain foods at certain time of the year because that is when they are available. And at other times of the year, they really won't interest us all that much. and people really ought to start listening to their bodies a little bit more. Because very often a food craving will tell you there is a certain nutrient you are not getting enough of. Now, obviously, this does not apply to, I want a double stuffed cheese pizza cravings, because that may be the monosodium glutamate talking to you. Again, people need to listen to their own body, because your body knows what's best for you. Certainly ahead of any mass marketing advertising executive who's out there pushing the latest corn dog, pig in a blanket thing that they've got in the freezer at the supermarket.
So I recommend prebiotics and try that. Today was I've tried it before, of course, like everybody, and we know this thing about sugar, and it's addictive, and usually I start out my day with a coffee with sugar, but today I have spent the whole day with no sugar. I had my coffee with no sugar and some tea with no sugar, and then I was talking to some people eating ice cream, and I didn't have this terrible craving. I saw them eating their ice cream and kind of thought, oh, I'm glad that, I didn't crave it. It starts a craving if you begin the day with it, and it's quite an addictive thing.
Well, it can be, and that first meal of the day can actually set a pattern for the rest of the day, which is part of what I did. Is I have a very, very light breakfast, and then I have a light lunch, and then Claire does a wonderful balanced meal for dinner. But you should have a little sugar in your diet. And one thing you need to avoid are these fly-by-night fad diets where they say, well, if you stop eating carbs, you'll be fine. Or if you ban all fats, you'll be fine. Because you need all of those things in reasonable amounts to have a healthy metabolism.
Michael?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, because suddenly I couldn't hear you. But in fact, I'm not sure we do have to eat sugar and carbs, because in a way, if I'm not wrong, and I was wrong one time, but if you eat whatever you eat, if you eat like zero carbs, if you eat steak, in order for your body to absorb it, your body turns it into a sugar anyway. It has to be turned into a glucose of sorts. I don't know the exact name.
Yes.
But you, at the cellular level, for your body to absorb food, it has to become a sugar, a glucose.
Well,
the body creates it.
Many, many years ago, when I was dealing with my weight issues, and this is going back more than 20 years, I tried the carbohydrate-free diet, the zero-carb diet. I actually experienced a serious mood swing with that. I just got cranky. I just, I had no sense of humor. And again, you cannot separate the biochemistry of the body from the biochemistry of the mind. But I think common sense says you need a well-balanced diet, a little bit from everything in moderation. Is going to work out best. And one thing I learned over all the years of trying to get my weight under control is that all of the books that are out there and the guidelines and the various fad diets. I got so angry the other day. I was down at Safeway, and there was one of these tabloids out there saying, it's not too late to get your bikini body. You can lose 30 pounds in 30 days with our exclusive diet. And I said, that is ridiculous. Not only is it going to be impossible and people are going to be frustrated, losing that much weight that quickly can be dangerous. Because instead of metabolizing fat, you're starting to metabolize your own muscle. And there's a lot of bad information that's put on out there. Because most people, when they all of a sudden wake up and say, ooh, I'm really too heavy, they want to lose the weight right then and there, and they'll sign up for this we'll mail the food to your house program, or they'll buy the exercise machines. That's the wrong way to go about it. If you are overweight and you want to lose weight, just understand right now, it is going to be a long, gradual process. It took you years to become overweight. It is going to take you years to safely lose that weight. Took me 2 years, averaging 1 pound a week.
Yeah. I sent to you one time an article that said why grains are killing you, and I don't know if you remember that, but I also went grain free. And when I read that article about why grains are killing you, it was simple enough that I understood the science of it. And so I did that. I went grain free. And it's not exactly easy because that means wheat and basically wheat. And so there's no bread and pasta and all that, but also rice and oats and.
All right, well, Kathleen, let me cut you off here because I got another call I want to get to right now here. You need to be very skeptical of any article that comes on out, especially in the corporate media, that says this is really bad for you, because you're usually going to find it's being paired with a sales pitch from a company that wants to sell you something in its place. This is bad for you, but we'll sell you, this is better for you. And a lot of marketing of products consists in basically going on out and hiring some scientist to write a report that says your competitor's product is actually bad for people. Then you go out to the media and you present it as straight news. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. And again, I worked in advertising many years ago, and I saw a lot of that going on. So I think, this idea of completely banning a particular type of nutrient from your life, that really, in the long run, does not make a lot of sense. Anyway, Kathleen, we're going to let you go. We're running out of time. Coming up on the end of the show.
Thank you.
We're going to switch over to Jesse in Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Hey, you had a caller last week that was talking about getting interviews or something with English-speaking Syrians or Iraqis or something.
Yes.
And, Assad speaks better English than most people I know.
Yes.
And he's got several interviews on, 20 and 30 minutes long on YouTube of his point of view on all of this. But I don't see them passed around much. I mean, even the views on those videos isn't very high for what it is.
Well, we know there's a lot of censorship going on online right now. We're having a big problem where apparently Shoutcast, which carries the Republic Broadcasting program for the streaming feed, is no longer listing RBN on their website or in the search engines. If you go to shoutcast.com and you try and find RBN or this show, they will not present it to you. We know that YouTube artificially deflates the count on videos. We've caught them doing it to Claire's music videos time after time after time. And the censorship is becoming so heavy-handed, it's becoming obvious to people, and that means that it's going to cease being an effective tool of propaganda because everybody's saying, oh, yeah, okay, this is the corporate media censoring everything again.
Right. All right. Well, that's really all I wanted to say is there's several good interviews with him, with different reporters and stuff. And
well, I've seen some of them. I've posted some of them. And, yes, he's very well spoken. Again, we need to find ways of undermining this image that's been created of him, whether Assad, Trump, because demonizing the leaders of other countries is a necessary first step to invading them. For all we know, Adolf Hitler may not have been the total jerk that he's been presented to us in the history books. We can't know. We really don't know. All we know is that the vast majority of what we've been taught in the state-controlled schools and by the corporate media is a lot of nonsense. And we should be very, very skeptical. Prudence demands we go back and we take a look at everything we think we know about history. Jesse, we're going to let you go here. We're coming up on our last commercial break. When we come on back, getting some strange rumors coming out of Washington, D.C., apparently coincident with the earlier report that Trump is now asking Sessions to investigate Hillary Clinton's ties to Russia. And now there is a conflicting report that is over at freebeacon.com saying that Sessions may be replaced as Attorney General and replaced with Rudy Giuliani, who would certainly not be at all useful in going after the crimes of the Clintons. So we're going to take a break for our last commercial. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I think a very powerful indicator of just how out of whack our food system is here in the United States of America. There is a big guidebook for psychologists and psychiatrists. It's a big diagnostic manual. A lot of criticism on it because it seems to take normal, everyday human behavior and call it a mental illness for which at some point there's going to be a medication. And believe it or not, this guidebook actually defines the desire to eat safe, healthy, natural food as a mental illness called orthorexia nervosa. I mean, that's literally what's coming on out. If you don't want to go down and get all that chemical-laden food at your local supermarket, there must be something wrong with you. You're crazy if you're afraid to eat a hot dog. You're crazy if you refuse your monosodium glutamate. That's kind of where we are on that. Now, Erin Brockovich is back. She's in South Carolina, down in Charleston County at Mount Pleasant City, and apparently she's down there digging around because apparently there's been a noticeable uptick in the occurrence of brain cancers in the area. Maybe John McCain was down there drinking some water. But there is a clearly defined cancer cluster, and the issue is the water at Mount Pleasant contaminated? Now remember, Erin Brockovich shot to fame over the Pacific Gas and Electric dumping of hexavalent chromium outside this town in California. And the people in the town were experiencing all these illnesses. And PG&E had sent out little brochures saying what we're dumping is the quadrivalent form of chromium, which is perfectly safe. It's absolutely safe, cannot harm you. And Erin Brockovich and the law firm she was working for established it was hexavalent chromium. PG&E knew they were doing that. Huge, huge, huge civil litigation, and of course a movie for Erin Brockovich herself. But we seem to have a real problem all across this country with water safety. Now, if you are concerned about the water where you are, you can go on out, for example, to eBay, and you can get a water testing kit for about $30 that will test multiple components of your water. Test for lead, test for biological contamination, test for all kinds of different things. And we got one when the Flint water crisis first surfaced. And as it turns out, we're very lucky. Our tap water is very clean. It's very hard, which makes sense. We're sucking it from the inside of an extinct volcano. But other than the hardness, it's very good water. But if you are concerned about your water, $30, that's all it's going to cost you, and you just follow the instructions inside the kit, and you will find out what's going on there. Latest word from San Antonio, one of the survivors from that horrible incident with the 18-wheeler, with all these illegal immigrants being smuggled in, 8 dead, 30 in the hospital. One of the survivors has fingered the Zetas cartel as being behind this particular human smuggling ring. Okay, there is the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard Show up in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller's program. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.